A young nurse bathed the millionaire in a coma, but when he suddenly woke up, something miraculous. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. On the top floor of St. Mary's Hospital, in a quiet corner where the night shift felt endless, a young nurse named Emily adjusted her gloves and walked into a private room. The monitors beeped steadily, and the soft hiss of oxygen filled the air. On the bed lay a man in his mid-30s, a patient who had been asleep for years. His name was Alexander Grant, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the country. To the world, he was a millionaire lost to silence. To Emily, he was simply a man who needed care, whether or not he could ever open his eyes again. Emily was only 24 years old, carrying the weight of student loans and the exhaustion of double shifts. Her paycheck barely covered rent for a tiny apartment and groceries, yet she showed up every day with the same gentle patience. Most nurses rotated away from coma patients, finding it too hopeless or too heavy. But Emily volunteered. She believed even the smallest kindness mattered, even if the world thought it was wasted on someone who could not respond. She filled a basin with warm water, tested the temperature on her wrist, and carefully began to bathe him. Every movement was deliberate, respectful, human. She spoke softly as she worked. "Good evening, Mr. Grant. It is me again, Emily. I know you cannot answer, but I am here." The truth was, she had been talking to him for months. She told him about the weather outside, about her long bus rides to work, about the kindness of an elderly patient who shared candy with the nurses. Sometimes she even read him poetry from her notebook, her voice trembling but sincere. No one else in the hospital knew this. They thought she was simply doing her duty. But for Emily, this routine was more than a task. It was her way of reminding herself that dignity does not depend on wealth, status, or consciousness. Yet, every time she looked at his face, pale but strong, framed by dark hair that still grew despite the years of stillness, a strange mix of hope and fear stirred inside her. She wondered what kind of man he had been before fate placed him here. Was he kind or arrogant? Was he lonely, despite all his money? Did he have someone who whispered to him at night before the accident took everything away? Outside the door, whispers of hospital staff carried. Some nurses said it was pointless, that Alexander Grant would never wake up. Others gossiped about his family, who rarely visited, too busy fighting over his company shares. Emily heard all of it, but she refused to let cynicism guide her. Instead, she carried on with her quiet devotion, unaware that each word, each gentle touch, was planting seeds of connection in a soul hidden beneath layers of silence. On that night, as she pulled the blanket up to his chest and switched off the bedside lamp, Emily paused. Her heart ached with an inexplicable heaviness. She whispered, almost like a prayer, "If you can hear me, hold on. You are not alone." In the sterile stillness of the hospital room, it seemed impossible that her voice could reach him. But deep inside, something stirred, unseen and miraculous, waiting for the moment when silence would finally break. Emily returned the following night with the same quiet determination. The hallway outside the private suite of Alexander Grant was silent except for the distant echo of rolling carts. Inside, the soft rhythm of monitors filled the air like a fragile heartbeat. For most staff, this was the sound of futility, but for Emily, it was the sound of promise. She carried with her a small notebook filled with handwritten poems, a battered novel, and a sketchbook she kept tucked under her arm. Her shift had already drained her, yet when she pushed open the door to his room, she felt her tiredness melt away. "Good evening, Mr. Grant. It is Emily again," she said with a gentle smile, as if greeting an old friend. Her routine had become almost ritual. After checking his vitals, she adjusted the pillows, changed the sheets, and carefully brushed his hair. She filled a fresh basin with warm water and wiped his face with tender precision. These were not just tasks to her. Each gesture was an unspoken vow that he still mattered. Once he was comfortable, Emily opened her notebook. I found something I want to share with you, she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost musical, as she read a poem about rivers carrying dreams to the sea. Her words filled the room, wrapping around the silence, making the sterile walls feel less cold. She imagined that somewhere beneath the stillness of his closed eyes, he was listening. Sometimes she talked about her day. She told him about the long bus ride through the city, about the elderly woman who sold flowers outside the hospital entrance, and about the child who waved at her through the window that morning. At first, these conversations felt one-sided, but the more she spoke, the more natural it became. Maybe you think I am silly, she murmured, arranging the sketchbook on the bedside table, but I believe people can hear, even if they cannot answer. If you are in there, I want you to know you are not forgotten. Her pencil began to move across the paper, sketching the outline of his face. She had drawn him many times before, capturing the quiet strength in his jawline, the peaceful curve of his brow. To anyone else, he was just a wealthy man trapped in a coma. But to Emily, he was a soul suspended in waiting, someone whose life was worth more than money or inheritance. Outside, the storm tapped against the window, but inside the room was a fragile sanctuary. She hummed a tune as she worked, a lullaby her mother once sang to her during sleepless nights. The melody drifted through the air, mingling with the steady beep of the monitor. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw his fingers twitch, but she shook her head, convincing herself it was only her imagination. Still, the thought lingered. She leaned closer, speaking with a mixture of hope and doubt. If you can hear me, Mr. Grant, just know that I will keep showing up. I will keep reading, singing, and drawing until the day you decide to come back. It was a promise spoken into the stillness. Though no one else believed he would ever awaken, Emily carried a conviction that her presence, her kindness, and her unwavering care might reach him in ways science could not explain. In that quiet hospital room, she became his anchor, holding on for both of them, waiting for a miracle that no one else dared to hope for. One rainy evening, weeks after she had begun reading her poems aloud each night, Emily noticed something that made her heart race. She had just finished a chapter from her favorite novel and set the book down when she saw his hand move ever so slightly. It was not a spasm, not a random flicker. It was a deliberate curl of his fingers, as if trying to respond to the rhythm of her voice. Her breath caught. She leaned closer, clutching his hand gently. "Mr. Grant, was that you? Can you hear me?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. She waited, eyes fixed on his still face, but the room remained silent. The monitor continued its steady beeping, unbroken. She whispered again, almost pleading. "If you can hear me, please, do it again." Oh no. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, ever so faintly, his index finger twitched. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It was small, but to her, it was monumental. She knew this was not coincidence. This was contact. This was life reaching back. The next morning, she reported it with cautious excitement to the attending physician. But instead of encouragement, she was met with skepticism. The doctor sighed, writing on his chart. "Emily, you are overworked. Patients in prolonged comas can have involuntary movements. Do not let yourself get attached. We have seen this before." She shook her head firmly. No, this was different. He reacted to my voice. He heard me. The physician gave her a sympathetic look, the kind reserved for dreamers. "I admire your dedication, but do not confuse hope with science. Please, do not set yourself up for disappointment." Word spread quickly among the staff. Some nurses rolled their eyes, muttering that Emily was imagining things because she was too soft-hearted. Others warned her that the Grant family would not appreciate her giving them false hope. By the end of the week, she felt the weight of their doubt pressing heavily on her shoulders. The greatest blow came when a member of the Grant family visited. It was his elder cousin, a sharp-dressed man who had taken a leading role in the business during Alexander's absence. He confronted Emily in the hallway outside the room. "I heard you have been claiming my cousin is responding to you," he said coldly. Emily tried to explain. "It is not a claim. I saw his hand move. Twice. He is trying to come back." The man narrowed his eyes. "Do not play games, nurse. You are paid to care for him, not to spread fantasies. If the board or the press hears of this nonsense, it could destabilize the company. We cannot afford rumors. If you value your position here, stop talking about it." The words stung, but Emily stood her ground. "With respect, sir, he is not just a company or a name on a chart. He is a person, and I will not stop speaking to him." Her defiance only deepened the hostility. Soon, whispers turned into reports. Some claimed she was inventing stories to make herself important. Others hinted she was trying to secure attention from a powerful family. Emily's integrity, her very career, began to hang by a thread. Yet every night, she returned to his side. She continued to read, to sing, to sketch. Even as doubt gnawed at her, she refused to abandon the spark she had witnessed. In the silence of that private room, she placed her hand over his once more and whispered, "I believe in you. I will keep believing until the world cannot deny it any longer." And though the world outside scoffed, deep inside the still body of Alexander Grant, a quiet storm was gathering. Something unseen was fighting to break free. A battle of will and spirit that science could not measure. Emily had no proof, but she felt it with every beat of her heart. The miracle she longed for was drawing closer, even as everyone else prepared to call her a fool. The night it finally happened, Emily almost did not believe her own eyes. She had just finished changing the sheets and was sitting at his bedside, sketchbook in hand. The storm outside rattled the windows with heavy rain, thunder rolling across the city. Inside, the monitors kept their steady rhythm, the only constant she could trust. She began to hum softly, the same lullaby she always sang, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, suddenly, his breathing changed. Emily froze, watching as his eyelids fluttered. At first, she thought it was another involuntary reflex, something she had seen before. But this time it did not stop. His lips moved faintly, and she heard the softest whisper escape them. "Emily." Her heart stopped. She leaned forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mr. Grant? Alexander? Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, slow and unsteady, but undeniably real. For the first time in years, the man who had been silent stared back at her. He blinked against the harsh hospital light, his gaze searching until it landed on her face. His lips trembled again, and though his voice was weak, there was no mistake. "Emily," he repeated, as though the sound of her name was an anchor pulling him back from the darkness. Emotion overwhelmed her. She pressed the call button with a shaking hand, but she did not let go of his. "I am here. You are safe. You came back." The door burst open as doctors and nurses rushed inside. Chaos erupted, orders shouted, machines adjusted. Yet Alexander's eyes never left Emily. Even as wires were checked and medications were prepared, his fragile focus stayed locked on the young nurse who had refused to give up on him. The physician who had once dismissed her claims stood in stunned silence. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. After all these years, Emily's tears fell freely, but she held her ground, answering firmly, "It is not impossible. He heard me." He was never alone. News of his awakening spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff gathered in the hallway, whispering in disbelief. The Grant family was contacted immediately. Some were shocked, others displeased, for his return meant a shift in power they had long controlled. But none of that mattered in this room. What mattered was the bond between a once voiceless man and the nurse whose devotion had reached him where medicine had failed. Hours later, when the chaos had calmed, Alexander spoke again. His words were weak, but they carried undeniable intent. "Do not leave me." Emily bent closer, her voice breaking with emotion. "I will not. I promised I would be here, and I will keep that promise." In that moment, the sterile hospital room felt transformed. It was no longer just a chamber of silence and despair. It became the place where hope broke through, where life itself returned against every odd. And though the world outside would soon debate inheritance, power, and headlines, none of that could diminish the miracle that had unfolded in Emily's quiet care. For Alexander, waking to the sight of her face was not just survival. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that would challenge both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. For Emily, hearing her name spoken from his lips was proof that her devotion had never been in vain. The miracle she had whispered for in countless lonely nights had finally arrived, and with it came a promise that their story was only beginning. In the days that followed his awakening, Alexander began the long road of recovery. His muscles had weakened from years of stillness, his voice cracked with effort, and even sitting upright required the assistance of more than one nurse. Yet Emily remained by his side, guiding him through each step with quiet determination. She held his arm as he tried to stand for the first time, offering gentle encouragement when his legs trembled. "You are stronger than you think," she whispered, steadying him as his weight nearly gave out. "Every step is proof that you are here, that you are fighting." Alexander looked at her, exhaustion etched into his face, but gratitude glimmered in his eyes. "I would not be doing this without you." Her heart swelled at his words, though she quickly masked it with professionalism. She reminded herself that she was his nurse, nothing more. But deep down, she could not ignore the warmth that spread whenever his gaze lingered on her. The hospital soon became a hive of attention. Reporters crowded outside the gates, hungry for photographs of the miracle millionaire. The board members of his company descended like hawks, already calculating how his return would change their positions. And then there was his family. Some arrived with tears of relief, but others carried eyes sharp with calculation. To them, his recovery was not just personal, it was a threat to carefully constructed control. One afternoon, Emily overheard a heated conversation outside his room. A cousin spoke harshly to another relative. "If he regains full strength, everything we built these past years is at risk. We cannot let a nurse's fairy tales undo our plans." The words chilled her. She realized that not everyone celebrated his return. Some saw it as a disaster. Their wealth and influence depended on him remaining silent, and now he was anything but. That evening, while Emily adjusted his blanket, Alexander studied her face. "You have been quiet. Something troubles you." She hesitated, torn between honesty and fear of burdening him. At last she admitted, "Not everyone is happy you are awake. There are people who would rather see you remain powerless." "No." He reached for her hand with surprising strength. "Let them come. They cannot take from me what truly matters. They cannot take you." Her cheeks flushed, but before she could answer, the door opened. A hospital administrator entered with a stern expression. "Nurse Emily, I need a word. There have been complaints regarding your conduct. Some allege you are overstepping boundaries with the patient." Emily's breath caught. "That is not true. I have only done my duty." "Oh." The administrator's tone was cold. "Nevertheless, the family insists on reviewing your position here. Until further notice, consider yourself under suspension." Her world seemed to collapse in that instant. She looked at Alexander, who struggled to sit taller, fury flashing in his eyes. "No," he rasped, his voice breaking. "She stays. I need her." But his protest was drowned beneath the weight of authority. Emily was escorted out of the room, her heart shattering with every step. She had given her soul to his care, and now she was cast aside as if she were nothing. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the sketchbook filled with his likeness. The city lights blinked outside her window, but all she felt was emptiness. Her name had been tarnished, her career jeopardized, and worst of all, she had been torn from the man who had finally returned to life. Back in the hospital, Alexander lay awake, his chest tight with anger. He had been helpless for years, but now he was awake, and the woman who had given him back his voice was being punished. He clenched his fists, vowing silently that this would not stand. For Emily it felt like the end, but for Alexander it marked the beginning of a battle. He would not let her sacrifice be erased. He would not let the truth be buried beneath greed and lies. And though his body was still weak, his resolve burned stronger than ever. The world that had doubted her devotion was about to be confronted by the man she had saved. Emily's suspension weighed on her like a sentence she did not deserve. She sat in her small apartment, the sketchbook of Alexander's portraits open across her knees. Each page told the story of countless nights spent in faith, every line and shadow proof of her devotion. Now it all felt stolen, erased by accusations she had no chance to fight. She whispered into the quiet room, "I kept my promise, and now I have nothing." Her voice broke, the sound swallowed by loneliness. Meanwhile, At St. Mary's Hospital, Alexander's frustration deepened. He had only just regained his voice, and already the one person who had stood by him had been ripped away. He lay awake through the long hours of the night, torn between physical weakness and burning anger. His body still trembled when he tried to rise, but his mind was sharp. "They think I will remain silent," he muttered, gripping the sheets, "but I will not." The very next morning, members of his family gathered around his bed, smiling with false sweetness. His cousin leaned close, speaking with oily concern. "You need rest, Alexander. Leave the business to us. Do not trouble yourself with details. And as for that nurse, well, you know how staff can be. Better not to get entangled." Alexander's jaw tightened. He knew their words were poison dressed as comfort. Every fiber of him wanted to expose them immediately, to declare Emily's innocence and their deceit. Yet he also knew that he needed strength, both in body and in evidence, before he struck back. For now, he played along, nodding weakly while rage smoldered beneath the surface. Emily's days crawled in emptiness. She tried to apply for shifts at smaller clinics, but whispers of her suspension for misconduct followed her like shadows. The humiliation cut deep, not only because her career was at stake, but because it painted her devotion as corruption. She cried into her pillow at night, mourning not just her job, but the bond she had been forced to abandon. Then, one evening, as she stepped off the bus near her apartment, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face, an old friend who worked quietly in the hospital. She leaned out and whispered urgently, "Emily, you must know. Alexander has been asking for you. He defends you at every turn, but they are silencing him. They want to keep you away so he cannot reveal the truth." Emily's heart raced. Hope and fear collided in her chest. He remembers me? He spoke my name?" "Yes," the woman replied firmly. "He remembers everything, and he will not stop until justice is served." That night, Emily sat by her window, staring at the stars above the city. She felt torn in two directions. Part of her longed to march back into the hospital and demand her place by his side. Another part feared that doing so would only make things worse, giving his enemies more ammunition to use against them. She whispered into the night, "What do I do? If I stay silent, I abandon him. If I fight, I risk everything." At the same time, Alexander wrestled with his own turmoil. He knew the board of his company, along with certain relatives, were conspiring to discredit Emily so their lies would remain unchallenged. He could expose them, but doing so too soon would put her in more danger. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between his hunger for justice and his desire to protect the woman who had carried him back to life. The weight of their choices pressed down like chains. Emily carried the sorrow of loss, her hands aching for the routine she had once built around him. Alexander carried the fury of betrayal, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the woman he owed everything to had been cast aside. For both of them, the nights were long, filled with the ache of separation and the whisper of unfinished promises. They stood at the edge of despair, facing a choice that would determine not just their own futures, but the truth itself. Would they remain silent victims? Or would they rise together to confront the shadows threatening to consume them? The world still doubted Emily, but Alexander's resolve only hardened. Weak as his body was, his spirit surged stronger each day. He knew one truth with absolute clarity. He would not let the woman who had given him her soul be destroyed. Somewhere deep inside, both of them understood silence could no longer hold. The time to choose justice was coming. Alexander did not wait any longer. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of his hospital room as he demanded a meeting with the hospital board and several members of his family. His voice was still weak, but his willpower carried each word with force. "Bring them here," he ordered. "Every single one who questioned her. I will speak." When they gathered, whispering among themselves, Alexander pushed himself upright, refusing assistance. The effort drained him, but he faced them with fire in his eyes. "You accused Emily of misconduct," he began, his voice rough but steady. "You painted her as unprofessional, as if her devotion was shameful. You are liars. Every one of you knows she saved me." His cousin sneered. "Alexander, you are confused. Months of unconsciousness can distort the mind. Do not ruin your reputation with wild claims. Alexander slammed his palm against the armrest of the chair. The sound silenced the room. I was in darkness for years. I heard nothing. I felt nothing. Until Emily. She bathed me, spoke to me, sang to me, and because of her, I found my way back. That is no confusion. That is truth. The physicians shifted uncomfortably. The administrators exchanged nervous glances. The weight of his words carried a power they could not dismiss. Meanwhile, Emily, unaware of the confrontation, sat at home clutching her sketchbook. She had decided she would not return to the hospital uninvited, fearing she would cause more harm than good. But even in her absence, her name was being defended in the most powerful voice possible. Alexander leaned forward, his breath heavy, but his conviction unshaken. I will not rest until her name is cleared. If any of you continue to conspire against her, you conspire against me. And I assure you, I am no longer powerless. The threat was unmistakable. The man they thought would remain a silent shadow had returned, not only awake, but determined. His family's empire trembled under his words. For the first time in years, the balance of power shifted back into his hands. That same night, Alexander made another decision. He requested a press conference. Doctors urged him to wait until he had regained more strength, but he refused. The world will hear the truth, he said firmly. They will know who Emily is. They will know what she did for me. Oh, the stage was set. After months of whispers and betrayal, Alexander was ready to fight not only for his own justice but for hers. Emily's devotion would no longer be hidden in the shadows of a quiet hospital room. It was about to be brought into the light of the world. The press conference was arranged in the hospital's main hall, cameras flashing as reporters filled the room. The world had been waiting to see the miracle heir who had awakened after years in a coma. Alexander sat in a wheelchair, his posture frail but his eyes burning with determination. Microphones crowded before him as journalists shouted questions. He raised a hand for silence. I will answer all of your questions, he said, his voice firm despite its weakness. But first, I must speak the truth. I am alive today because of one woman. Her name is Emily. She is a nurse who cared for me when everyone else gave up. She spoke to me. She read to me. She reminded me that I was human when I was nothing more than a body to the rest of the world. Without her, I would not be sitting here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The flash of cameras grew frantic. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing the story was no longer about business or inheritance, but about something far deeper. Alexander continued. This woman has been accused falsely, shamed for her devotion. I will not allow her name to be tarnished any longer. She gave me life. That is the truth. And the world deserves to know it. At that moment, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, summoned by a friend who had begged her to come. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had not expected to face a room full of cameras, nor to hear her name spoken so publicly. Alexander's gaze found her instantly. His expression softened, and he gestured toward her. There she is, he said, his voice breaking. The woman who saved me. The crowd turned, lenses capturing her stunned face. For a heartbeat, she wanted to run. But Alexander's steady gaze anchored her, pulling her forward step by hesitant step until she stood beside him. He reached for her hand, and without hesitation, she placed hers in his. This is not only my nurse, Alexander declared, squeezing her hand. This is my miracle. Oh. Tears filled Emily's eyes as the room erupted in questions, lights, and noise. Yet for her, none of it mattered. All she felt was the warmth of his hand, the strength of his words, and the vindication that her months of devotion had not been in vain. In that hall, surrounded by strangers and flashing lights, Emily and Alexander shared a quiet moment of triumph. The world could no longer deny the bond between them, nor the miracle that had unfolded in silence. For the first time, their story was no longer hidden. It was a truth spoken aloud, a light too bright to be buried by lies. The days after the press conference were a storm of headlines, interviews, and endless questions from the world. Some papers called it the miracle awakening. Others focused on the controversy, asking whether a nurse and a millionaire could truly share something beyond circumstance. But for Emily and Alexander, The noise of the outside world mattered far less than the quiet moments they finally had together. In the hospital garden, where spring flowers pushed through the soil, Alexander practiced walking again. Each step was slow and unsteady, but Emily was there beside him, holding his arm, steadying his balance. "I told you I would not leave," she said softly. "And I never will." He stopped to catch his breath, turning to her with a look of fierce sincerity. "Emily, I once had everything: money, power, status, and it all vanished the moment I fell into that coma. But you gave me something greater than all of it. You gave me dignity when I was helpless. You gave me life when I was lost. I do not just want you at my side as a nurse. I want you at my side for the rest of my life." Her heart trembled at his words. The weight of the past months, the loneliness, the accusations, the nights she had doubted herself, all of it melted away. She whispered through her tears, "Alexander, I never asked for anything in return, but if you are certain, if this is truly your choice, then I will stand with you." He smiled, not the weak smile of a recovering patient, but the confident smile of a man who had reclaimed his soul. "It is not only my choice, it is my truth." Soon after, Alexander called another gathering, not for the press, but for his company and family. He stood, still leaning on a cane, Emily at his side. "This woman," he declared, "is not just my caregiver, she is my partner. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who tries to erase her sacrifice will answer to me." His words carried the authority of a man reborn, a man who no longer feared the shadows of power. The silence that followed was heavy, but no one dared to challenge him. Emily's honor was restored, her place secured not by wealth or influence, but by the undeniable truth of their bond. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Emily and Alexander returned to the same hospital room where everything had begun. The sketchbook lay on the table, filled with drawings she had made during his silent years. He opened it slowly, tracing the lines of his own sleeping face. "Every page is proof that you never gave up on me," he said. "Now I will never give up on us." Emily smiled through her tears, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace, not the fragile peace of silence, but the solid peace of love earned through trial and truth. Their story had been forged in loneliness, struggle, and injustice, but it ended in vindication. The world would remember Alexander Grant as the millionaire who returned from the shadows. But Emily knew the deeper truth. He had not been saved by wealth, but by love. And as they walked hand in hand into a future no longer bound by silence, both of them understood that miracles were not found in fortune or fame, but in hearts brave enough to believe.